Matthew, are Ukrainian officials changing their strategy at all as Russia shells multiple cities now?
Well, I mean, look, there's not much they can do about the fact that Russia is shelling these cities, these multiple cities. But what they are doing is continuing this strategy, these tactics that they've employed on the ground, which have been pretty successful. They've won some significant sort of tactical victories, hitting Russian armored columns as they approach the main city areas, and we've seen multiple examples of that. But also, they've been stepping up the diplomatic effort, not just to engage with the Russians. There's been the highest level talks in the past few days between Ukrainian and Russian officials. It took place in Turkey with the foreign ministers since the conflict began. And of course, they're continuing to press these calls on the Western allies, including the United States, to give them more weapons and to enforce a no-fly zone. That is all that the Ukrainians have at the moment in their arsenal, Erin.
Well, Matthew, thank you very much. And I want to go now to retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton, former member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Steve Hall, former CIA Chief of Russia Operations. So, Colonel Leighton, let me just start with you. You hear Matthew Chance talking about Russian state TV, claiming that Syrian fighters are going to Ukraine to help Russia, right? And the implication's been, right, that there could be, 16,000 of them. They're putting out these incredibly high numbers. What does this tell you?
Well, Aaron, it tells me that they're going to brutalize this war effort. They're going to do what they can to make this look like Aleppo or, any of the other Syrian cities that we've heard about in the horrible Syrian civil war. And the effort to bring these Syrian forces in also means that Putin may not trust his conscripts to do the job. Because these conscripts and his professional military, the more professional elements, may not have the brutality that Putin may want in order to subjugate Ukraine. And I think that's unfortunately what we're going to be seeing here.
So, Steve, President Biden, again, made it clear today that the United States will not send ground troops into Ukraine. All right. And he's being very clear as to why. The quote is, "We will not fight the Third World War in Ukraine." But, Steve, he also made clear that the United States will continue to send weapons to Ukraine. So do you think there is a clear line in Putin's head on when U.S. aid, lethal aid that is killing Russian soldiers to Ukraine, is the equivalent of war?
I'm not sure that there is in Putin's mind. And it's not because, Aaron, that he's not clear about what he's doing or that he's indecisive. But I think he wants to leave himself maximum flexibility. We've already seen him state one thing, which is that, okay, these economic sanctions that are being imposed by the West on Russia constitute an act of war. So he's trying to play that because he understands that in the West, we are very concerned, especially the president has said, look, I'm worried about World War III. I think many Americans are, despite the atrocities and brutalities that are going on. But nevertheless, Putin wants to leave himself enough room to be able to say, okay, well, that was something that you guys did that really, really upset me, and I'm going to call that an act of war. Or, whatever it is that he chooses. Right. So it's not that he doesn't know, he just has not decided where he's going to play it yet.
And Colonel Leighton, on this obviously central question of where this escalates, how it escalates, the drone that I mentioned a moment ago, likely flying from Ukraine, crashed overnight in Croatia. Okay, not close to Ukraine. The Croatian defense minister says today it isn't clear whether it's a Russian or a Ukrainian drone, but Croatia, of course, is a NATO country. Colonel, when you think about this, right, it left a big hole in the ground. It didn't kill anybody, but it could have killed somebody. And it just shows that this very easily could go someplace nobody wants it to go.
Yeah, that's for sure, Aaron. And, it reminds me of the time a few years ago when the U.S. lost a drone that was flying over Afghanistan, and it happened to end up in Iran. Now, of course, I think the situation at least seems to be a bit different there. That was an RQ-170 from a highly secret, highly sensitive drone from the U.S. arsenal. This one is, according to reports that you've shown, an older Soviet-era type instrument. But regardless, it could have been packed with explosives. It could have been packed with some kind of a chemical agent. There are all kinds of things that could have happened and could have gone wrong here. So the risk of escalation is extremely high. This drone probably lost radio contact with its operators by all accounts. But regardless, it could escalate things very quickly if we're not careful, and we have to measure our responses carefully in a case like
and of
this.
course, the Russians are not being careful. Steve, President Zelensky just moments ago in his what has become basically his nightly address said Ukraine has captured, quote, thousands of Russian soldiers. Ukraine also claims that it has killed or captured around 12,000 Russian soldiers. So you've got 12,000 killed and thousands captured, according to the Ukrainians. Steve, do you think any of those numbers could possibly be true?
Yeah, I think it is possible that they're true. Now, are they likely to be inflated, wishful thinking or, the difficulty in getting information from the battlefield? Possibly. But it's clear that the Russians have lost a lot more personnel and troops on the ground than I think that they anticipated. And that's going to have an impact in Putin's calculations as well in the end of the day, I think.
All right. Thank you both so very much. And next, she was one of the faces of those injured after an attack in a maternity ward. And Russia claimed the whole photo was staged, that she was an actress, right? That the whole thing didn't happen. Well, that's not true. And that woman has now given birth to a baby girl. So will the facts be enough to counter the lies that Russia put out? Plus, Ukraine now warning Russia may be planning a terror attack at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And Doctors Without Borders calling the humanitarian crisis in Mariupol extremely dire. I'm going to speak to a Ukrainian student in California waiting for word on her family there tonight. A remarkable show of dissent against the invasion of Ukraine happening in the unlikeliest of places, Russian state TV. On Wednesday night, a Russian filmmaker said this to a pro-Putin anchor.
The war in Ukraine paints a frightening picture, and we should be aware that it has a very oppressive influence on our society, emotionally. This is Ukraine. Whatever your attitude may be, it is something to which we are bound by dozens and hundreds of ties. It is where the suffering of some innocents is no compensation for the suffering of other innocents.
Out front now, Katerina Khodorkadze, news director and anchor at TV Rain, an independent Russian outlet that says it was shut down by the government. And Katerina, I really appreciate your time. As TV Rain staff signed off, I know your network played Swan Lake in a nod to the 1991 coup attempt of Mikhail Gorbachev, because as that coup attempt unfolded, state TV played Swan Lake. And that's how people knew that something was amiss, that something was wrong. And obviously, that was the statement that you all made when you were forced off the air in light of these new laws, right, that could put someone in prison for 15 years for even calling this a war. In that context, when you heard that very pro-Putin anchor interviewing somebody who had been for the Crimea invasion, as I understand it, who says the suffering of innocents are no compensation for the suffering of other innocents. The war, calling it a war, is a frightening picture. We should be aware it has an oppressive influence on our society. Did it surprise you to hear that?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. And answering your question, well, yes, I was surprised, because you can hear such things and such thoughts on Russian state television. But, this is an exception. You can't find a lot of people, a lot of guests on this television channels who could say something like that, who could say even a couple of words about the victims of this so-called special operation. Mainly, they go on with this terrible propaganda, claiming that there are Nazis sitting in Kiev, that Zelensky and other people who are now on the front line, that they are fascists trying to kill Russians in Donbass. And they are, going on with this myth, terrible fake, that NATO is a threat to Russia, and Ukraine, together with NATO, are trying to destroy Russian Federation with a nuclear weapon or biological weapon, or such, terrible fakes that they're trying to spread, and people really believe it. Not everyone in Russia, definitely not, but there are a lot of millions, I suppose, who still watch television, who come back home from work, and they, automatically they just switch on this propaganda channels, and they really trust these guys.
So, and you talk about, these absolutely untrue, propaganda that they put out there. After Russian airstrikes damaged that maternity ward in Mariupol this week, the AP published pictures, and I know you saw these, Ekaterina, of course, of a pregnant woman injured by the attack. So then the Russian embassy in London puts out her picture, and Twitter eventually deleted these tweets, but says these photos are staged, that she was an actress, that she was, I guess, pretending to be pregnant, pretending to be there, basically that this was all staged, that they didn't hurt anybody. That's a lie. She was pregnant. She has actually since given birth to a baby girl named Veronica. I'm going to show you. There she is. Images captured by the AP again, showing her with that new baby there in Mariupol, debunking what the Russians were claiming. Is that kind of propaganda, putting that out and saying that that pregnant woman who gave birth to a child who was in that hospital, that she was some kind of an actress, do people believe that in Russia?
Well, because they don't check information that they get. A lot of people they don't do that. They don't have a habit of checking information. There is another problem that the reliable media sources, information sources, are banned and blocked in Russia, just as TV Rain is. People are searching right now. I'm personally getting thousands of messages from people who are asking, begging for rebuilding of TV Rain, for example, or radio station Echo of Moscow, which was very influential as well, just to get some information, because people are exhausted, people are devastated and confused. They just cannot understand what's going on. And some of Russians just don't read in English. They don't understand where to go, and they don't watch CNN or other reliable sources. So it's a real problem. And it's getting me crazy when I just every time I hear or see this kinds of fakes or propaganda. I remember that years ago when everything has started in 2014 in Ukraine, Russian state television, the first channel, has actually told the story about a little boy that was killed by fascists in Ukraine. And this story became the symbol of fakes. There was no boy. I mean, it was all manufactured. And, after that, I can't believe that people still switch television and they still trust these guys telling them these lies. But yeah, I mean, this is, unfortunately, after the years of this aggressive propaganda, 24/7 lying on screens,
yes,
some of people, unfortunately, are not defended by against this.
It is just unbelievable and frightening. All right, Ekaterina, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much to you for speaking to me. And next, new explosions lighting up the sky in southern Ukraine tonight as we learn more about the mayor, who Ukraine says was abducted by Russian forces, literally a plastic bag put over his head. We've got a live report on that next with what we know. Plus, a senior U.S. defense official says the port city of Mariupol is now, quote, seeing heavy bombardment by Russian forces. I'm going to speak to a family in California desperate for word from their loved ones there.
I'm Sarah Seidner in Medica, Poland, and this is CNN.
Breaking news, heavy shelling reported tonight in the southern Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv. Videos posted to social media showing multiple fires across that city, including the ones you are seeing here. These are at a large apartment complex. Nick Payton-Walsh is out front in Odessa. And of course, Nick, you've been in Mykolaiv most of the week, so you know exactly these locations that we are now seeing explode. Tell me what you do know about the attacks.
I have to say that video is some of the worst shelling we've seen hitting Mykolaiv over the past weeks or so. And we've watched from our own positions how shells seem to randomly hit vast swathes of residential areas. We've seen ourselves how the remnants of cluster munitions visible in ordinary civilian cars, vegetable patches. What we're seeing tonight from the regional head, a statement suggesting that a cafe, a car workshop have been hit during this intense bombardment that he called indiscriminate. And what's difficult to tell about this particular episode is whether or not it relates to a Russian military move against the city. There's been the suggestion in the same post by the regional head that there is some sort of active hostilities in the northern part of the city. That is exactly where we've seen Russian troops try to move around the city down towards its western side, the fear being that they're essentially moving to try and encircle it, to recreate what we're seeing in Mariupol far to the east of Mykolaiv on the Sea of Azov, which is essentially the besieging of that particular city and it's grinding down to ruins. Mykolaiv, though, a place where the civilian toll has been startling so far, as has the Russian inability to move into the city's centre. And so the latest post from the regional head talks about a boring night and how he's going to get some rest. That may just be trying to keep people's morale up, but certainly what's been true over the past days, Erin, is that we've not seen the Russian military successfully gain control over that city or move past it on their way to here, what most think of the strategic goal of the main port of Odessa. Erin?
Yeah. It is amazing, of course, the incredible fortitude that we continue to see. Nick, thank you so very much. It's live in Odessa tonight. And more breaking news, the U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm has just tweeted, and I want to read it to you. It says, "We remain concerned by the lack of data from safeguards monitors at Chernobyl or Zaporizhia, which hinders the world's ability to track materials from those sites." Those obviously are two nuclear sites. Zaporizhia is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. Chernobyl is a massive pile of nuclear waste. This is Ukraine warns Russia may be planning a terror attack at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which Russia has now seized control of. That plant is currently without power. It's off the grid. Ukraine also says it lost all communication with the plant. Now, it has 20,000 nuclear fuel rods there. They have to be cooled. So when it's off the grid, that is something to be pretty concerned about. They currently are on diesel backups. They last 48 hours. Right at the end of that window today, they got a diesel fuel delivery, we understand, for the backup generators. That was within hours of running out. But as I said, 20,000 spent nuclear fuel assemblies that'll overheat if they don't get cooled, running off of a generator. That's not intended to be, nor can it be, a permanent solution. Every 48 hours it needs to be refilled. The head of the company that oversees Ukraine's nuclear plants urging the world to act now before it is too late. Here's what he shared with us.
The ongoing Russian shelling makes it impossible to carry out repairs and restore power supply. We are calling on the global community to apply all their efforts to prevent a new worldwide catastrophe.
To prevent a worldwide catastrophe. Out front now is Edwin Lyman. He is the Director of Nuclear Power Safety at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And Edwin, I really appreciate your time. So Chernobyl is without power, right? There's a massive 20,000 rods that need to be cooled, right, that are nuclear waste. Needed repairs are not being made. Ukraine says it's lost all communication with it. The regulator says that the staff and the guards who you just heard talk there, he also told me that they've been living there for more than 2 weeks, limited amounts of food, same shift, right, that's been there for 2 weeks, not allowed to go anywhere. He says the psychological pressure on them is incredibly severe and bad. How serious is all of this?
Well, these are all troubling factors because any nuclear facility needs to have multiple levels of safety in case something does go wrong. So the fact that there's no offsite power right now, the fact that the staff are undoubtedly fatigued, under stress, and the fact that there are these 20,000 spent fuel rods that do require cooling from electrically powered pumps are all troubling. However, the good news is that even if power is lost to that facility, there would be time, probably many weeks, to intervene before there was significant damage to the fuel in the pool.
So, okay, so I guess we'll take the positive of that. I know obviously he's saying, look, there's 7 days from the power, but I hope that it would be weeks. But all of this, of course, is very concerning with the staff. He also said something about the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant that I wanted to ask you about. Edwin, that obviously is the largest plant in all of Europe. Russia attacked that plant, has control of it. The first of the plant's 6 units, which is home to a nuclear reactor, was damaged by the shelling. Again, this is from the man you just saw who oversees all of these. He says there was significant damage to the elevated walkway by Unit 2. The transformer at Unit 6 taken out of service. The cooling system there, he said, was damaged. And a fire destroyed the plant's training building. Here is what Mr. Coden had to say about that.
At the moment, there are 50 units of heavy equipment, about 400 Russian soldiers, and a lot of explosives and weapons on site. Also, the Ukrainian staff work at the plant in all 6 power units. The management is forced by occupiers to coordinate all technical issues. The staff is under heavy psychological pressure from the occupiers, but our people are resisting. An accident can happen at any moment.
How worried are you about Zaporizhia?
Yes, well, Zaporizhia, because it has operating nuclear power plants as well as spent nuclear fuel, which is hotter than the fuel at Chernobyl, poses a greater concern. And although the situation seems relatively stable right now, it is a cause for concern, because if there is a mistake or if something goes wrong, that staff under pressure may not be able to function well enough to prevent a disaster. So no nuclear power plant should be the target of a war. The staff should be allowed to do what they need to do without undue pressure. There need to be supplies. There need to be the infrastructure of the plant needs to be maintained. And because we're not sure about many of those factors, I think there is cause for concern. Again, there would be time to intervene if something did happen, but probably less time, a lot less time than at Chernobyl. So there needs to be an agreement that these plants be off the target list and outside of any kind of military campaigns.
Right, and obviously not at all what we have seen. Thank you so much. I appreciate the context. Edwin, thank you. And next, an official in Mariupol says it's impossible to count the dead bodies in the streets because of the fighting being so intense. I'm going to talk to a Ukrainian student worried about her loved ones there. And the children of Ukraine going to school online, thinking about their classmates, that connection that they're getting still online learning going on. It is an incredible story in this time of war. Ukrainian officials tonight saying the death toll in the besieged city of Mariupol now stands at nearly 1,600 people, civilians. An advisor to the city's mayor telling the New York Times it's actually impossible, though, to know the real number, which they say is likely much higher because Russian forces won't stop shelling the city. So they can't actually even go and find who has perished. It comes as Doctors Without Borders is detailing what they call an extremely dire humanitarian catastrophe unfolding as I speak right now in Mariupol. Families lack food, water, medicine. They're not able to bring those things in now. Children seeing a high risk of dehydration. Cholera is now a major concern. Out front now, Melania Nikolenko. 3 of her grandparents are currently in Mariupol. And Melania, I'm so sorry. I know that the stress and worry for your family is hard for any of us to truly comprehend. When was the last time that you and your family spoke with your grandparents?
It was last Wednesday. Yeah. Since then, they don't have like any internet or cellular, anything.
So at that time, and I know things have changed so much. You're saying last Wednesday, over a week ago, not 2 days ago, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
So much has changed, and I know it has gotten so much worse. Yeah. So I know that you don't know that what they're going through right now. But at that time, what did they tell you?
At that time, they were already like out of medicine because my granddad, he has like the diabetes, so he needed like insulin and nothing like coming there. So even like a Red Cross can't get to the Mariupol. It was like more than a week ago. So yeah, and my grandmother, she's in the center of the city, so she was like in a danger. She was trying to leave the city, but she couldn't. And right now we think she's like in really big like danger.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And I know that not being able to have the diabetes medicine you're now talking about for over a week. I know, obviously, but the cell phone's down. You know, it's been impossible for anyone in your family to reach them. Have you been able to get any updates in any way, or has it just been a complete void of information?
So with my grandparents, we're like 10 minutes away from the center of the city, the Mariupol. We actually connected with like one friend that like entered the city, and they talked with my aunt for like 5 minutes. They said they're okay. They're all sitting together in the house. They're like hiding in the basement, but just don't have like the medicines and like food supplies coming like anytime. Like, so they out of it.
And that is what is so terrifying about it. I know that, with those medical conditions, it must have been really hard for them to even consider leaving. It's of course their home. Did you try to get them to leave as those forces were on the border and the invasion seemed more and more imminent, or were they were just too afraid to leave at that time?
We did try. First week, we actually did really hard trying to get them out of the city. But at the first days, Russian army already circled the city in kind of the circle from all the ways. So you couldn't enter the city or leave the city. Those people who left it was really small amount of people, and they were considered lucky because you cannot be safe when you're living, because they can literally shoot in the cars and whatever they want. So, and if my granddad, he's with disability and stuff, so it would be really hard time even the city like Zaporizhia that is 1 hour away.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, Melania, I really appreciate your sharing this. I know it's got to be so stressful, but it is so important for people to understand these dire situations. Yeah. People, vulnerable people, older people don't have their medicine, don't have access to the food and the humanitarian aid. I just hope people hear you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And next, an incredible story of commitment. Children from Ukraine, despite fleeing a war, some are still finding a way to continue going to school. This is a stunning story. Plus, the war in Ukraine obviously affecting gas prices around the world. Here is what one truck driver is experiencing.
It's an extra $800 a month. I mean, I don't care who you are, that's going to hurt you.
Tonight, the number of refugees leaving Ukraine due to Russia's invasion now topping 2.5 million. Many of these, of course, as we have all seen, we saw there and you see on your screens every single night, are children whose lives will never be the same. For some, though, what they're thinking about is missing their friends, seeing their fellow classmates again online. Who knows if they'll ever see them again in person, to make sure that they're okay, that they're alive, to find out where in the world they are right now. Ivan Watson is out front in Chisinau, Moldova.
An all too familiar scene for parents who lived through the COVID pandemic. Children fidgeting through a Zoom class about the solar system. The difference here, most of these Ukrainian school kids are refugees, reconnecting with their classmates and teacher online. In the last 2 weeks, the students and their teacher fled to different countries to escape Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How old are your students?
7, 8.
From Poland, Nadia Pavlenka teaches her students online classes, even though the school stopped paying her salary.
Непонятно, что будет.
None of us know what will happen next, she says, but these classes with my children are like a bridge to my past life in Ukraine. They help us feel connected. Wartime distance learning. There's a lot of this going on right now.
Do you think the online classes are helping these kids?
Very much. It's helping them and mental health to feel the routine, that the life is still going on. That it's not the end of the world.
Alexander Parkalab is a schoolteacher who fled the Ukrainian city of Odessa to neighboring Moldova. In the morning, he teaches students from his Ukrainian school online.
Children ask me if I'm safe, where I am, with who I am. They were asking me before me asking them.
In the afternoon, he comes here, a makeshift school for Ukrainian children in the Moldovan capital.
Parents asked me to make a place to feel very safety and maybe just emotionally for 2-3 hours or more, just feel, to escape all this.
Half of his online students fled across borders. The other half are still in Ukraine.
The first lesson in Zoom, I said that you should be this first domino to help somebody. Maybe your mother need help, maybe mother's friends need help, and this is what can I do. I cannot change the world, but I can change me and change the mood of my mother, and it will be like a domino.
These girls say they're looking forward to starting online classes with their Ukrainian classmates on Monday.
Lena says she wants to find out where her classmates traveled to and to make sure that they're healthy right now.
8-year-old Timur Zhdanov and his father Artem stayed behind in Ukraine.
Were you surprised when Timur's teacher said, hey, we're going to continue
online learning?
Honestly, yeah, I think that they're feeling this strong connection with Ukraine and then want to support us as much as they can, and also a new generation of Ukrainian people.
A new generation that may grow up in exile, relying on technology to stay connected to their homeland. And Aaron, as inspiring as the commitment of these teachers is, there are limits. That young woman, Nadia, who fled to Poland, she is now a refugee living in the homes of a Polish family, and she recognizes that she's going to have to get a job now to try to make ends meet. So there may come a time where she won't be able to teach these kids. And that gets to the tragedy of 2.5 million people and growing who fled Ukraine. They've lost their homes, they've lost jobs and livelihoods, and that may mean an end to education as well.
It's unbelievable, too, and talk of the language barriers, too. Ivan, thank you so much. And as Ivan said, 2.5 million, I just kind of emphasize this every single night. That is just the beginning, everybody. There are 44 million people who live in Ukraine. And next, the war in Ukraine is pushing gas prices, of course, higher around the world. That has families cutting back on food and even pulling kids from daycare. The war in Ukraine driving gas prices up, well, everywhere. And in the U.S., Kyung La has this special report.
I'm an owner-operator, which means I own my own truck. There's no cutting back when it comes to diesel.
On the road with independent driver Ruben Ponce, who has no options around the skyrocketing price of fuel.
Every week it was getting higher and higher and higher. It's $100 more today, and it was also $100 more 2 days ago. And I mean, just think about it. It's an extra $800 a month. I mean, I don't care who you are, that's going to hurt you.
The pain is worst in California, where gas prices are higher than any other state in the U.S., and financial fear is already impacting families.
Here in the Los Angeles area, people are waiting up to 30 minutes to fill their tanks. This isn't a supply issue. It is all about the price. This gas station is selling it for about $1 a gallon less than other stations nearby. So, for the people who are waiting in line, it is worth their time just to save some cash.
And no one is immune, from the doctor to the new mom.
Then I got to go back to work. Then I get off work to drive over here, then go back home.
All that back and forth already means Alicia Brown can't make her current daycare for 8-month-old Josiah work.
Now I'm about to get him out of this daycare because I can't afford the gas.
Kevin Corbin works a second job for Uber Eats to support his family. $20 at the pump starts his evening.
How much gas was that?
A little over 3.5 gallons.
Yeah. 3.5 gallons?
Yep. That's it. Minus the 30, I made $13.
Last night, you made $13 last night?
If you factor in the fact that I put $30 in the tank, $13.
But economists say, accounting for wages and inflation, the consumer can handle the rise in prices.
As a fraction of everything we consume, gas is smaller today, even at $6 a gallon, than it was 10 years ago, than it was 40 years ago.
What's different now is how Americans feel in 2022.
We're hitting up on, exhaustion as human beings.
And so you're exhausted and you pull into the gas station and you see that.
And then you're more exhausted, right?
Ruben Ponce fears that uncertainty won't stop at his truck and will trickle down to the average consumer.
Is that coming to their house? Is that going to come to their bank account?
I don't see how it's not. Food, clothes, whatever it is, it's going to go up. So we're all going to feel it.
Kyung La, CNN, Long Beach, California.
AC 360 starts now.
Good evening from Lviv, Ukraine. We come to you tonight with new signs that Russia is widening the geographic scope of the fighting and deepening concern that it could be laying the groundwork to possibly use chemical weapons. Since we left you last night, Russia targeted 2 cities here in western Ukraine. You'll recall air raid sirens were sounding as we went off the air, though the actual strikes were about 90 minutes from here in either direction. Now, this is video from Lutsk, which is just 70 miles or so from the border of NATO ally Poland. According to the regional governor, the local airport was hit by 4 bomber-fired missiles, doing substantial damage, killing 2 people. A military airfield about 150 miles south was also hit. Now, north of Kyiv, those artillery units that we showed you last night, which had redeployed from the big convoy, have now apparently gone into action. This is a new photo from the satellite imaging company Maxar. You can see some smoke coming from a number of the artillery pieces, and as you can see from the flash of orange, the satellite camera appears to have also captured the muzzle flash from one of those guns. However, it's unclear exactly what they are firing at. There's also new video as well, a fresh reminder of just how punishing Russian tactics have been. This comes from Dnipro, and it was provided by Ukrainian emergency services. Now, this is the first time in Russia's invasion that they have hit that city. And it's significant beyond just that fact, because this is a city where people from further east have been fleeing to for safety, no longer safe. According to authorities, there were 3 Russian airstrikes here, one near a preschool, an apartment building, killing 1. In Melitopol, the mayor was led away by armed gunmen. Now, the prosecutor's office for the separatist Russia-backed Luhansk region now says they are weighing terrorism charges against him. That's a surveillance video. You can barely see him being led away. This is the first known instance of a Ukrainian political official being detained and investigated by Russian or Russian-backed forces since the invasion began. Now, also today, President Biden warned Russia against using chemical weapons. At the same time, he again said the United States will not be taking a direct role in the fighting here.
We're going to continue to stand together with our allies in Europe and send unmistakable message. We'll defend every single inch of NATO territory with the full might of the united and galvanized NATO. We will not fight a war against Russia in Ukraine. Direct confrontation between NATO and Russia is World War III, something we must strive to prevent.
Well, we'll talk more about the concerns about a widening conflict shortly with our military experts. We'll also check in with Olena Ganes, who has been living, as you may know if you've watched this program over the last 2 weeks or so, with her 3 young children in a shelter in Kyiv while her husband serves as a defense volunteer. Here's some of what she said earlier today to the question of leaving Ukraine.
The main thing is just the feeling in my heart and in my mind, in my soul, in my body. I have the feelings that I'm needed here, I stay here, and I do something useful. So I'm the most useful here for my country, for my people. And Katya just said a very good thing. She said, why are you asking us to be evacuated? These are Russians that need to be evacuated from Ukraine. These are Russian troops that need to go away, not we Ukrainians. They invaded our land and they need to go back home.
A mom with her 3 kids. My conversation with her shortly. Also, reports from across the region and the Atlantic. CNN Chief International Correspondent Clarissa Ward is in Kyiv tonight, and in Washington, CNN Chief White House Correspondent Caitlin Collins. First, I want to give a quick overview of the developments which we saw today from CNN's Oren Lieberman.
Tonight, the Russian military is expanding its invasion of Ukraine, increasing its attacks on the western part of the country. Fire and smoke seen in the aftermath of strikes on airfields near the Polish border. It's a scene that played out in cities all across the country as Russia unleashed a barrage of attacks in the early morning hours. In the central city of Dnipro, fire poured out of a destroyed factory, the rubble littering the ground, and another strike near a preschool and an apartment building. In Cherniv, an isolated city north of Kyiv, an explosion destroyed a soccer stadium and a nearby library. This crater shows the force of the impact. In Izium, a city near the border with Russia, a strike destroyed a home for the disabled, many of whom are elderly. And there's growing evidence that the town of Volnovakha in eastern Ukraine has fallen to Russian forces and their separatist allies. Russian troops are seen running through the decimated streets. Russia has falsely accused the U.S. of supporting experiments in Ukraine with biological and chemical weapons. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says it's a sign that Russia itself intends to use such weapons.
This makes me really worried because we've been repeatedly convinced if you want to know Russia's plans, look at what Russia accuses others of.
President Joe Biden didn't go as far as drawing a red line on the use of chemical weapons by Russia, but he did issue this threat.
I'm not going to speak about the intelligence, but Russia would pay a severe price if they use chemical weapons.
The Russian advance is closing in on Kyiv. It is slow progress against a fierce Ukrainian resistance that has turned the capital city into a fortress. The Pentagon says one Russian approach to the city is about 10 miles outside the city's center. Oren Lieberman, CNN at the Pentagon.
So with that, let's go straight to Clarissa Ward in Kyiv. What have you been seeing and hearing there tonight and throughout the day?
So, Anderson, I don't think the microphone will pick up on it because it's just inside the room. But right now we are hearing just a nonstop volley. It's been going on for at least 3 minutes at this stage, literally nonstop, no break of just heavy booms in the distance. I do want to underscore that it's impossible for us to know whether those are Russian strikes coming in to some of those Kyiv suburbs or whether they are Ukrainian strikes going out. Because as you know, Ukrainians have been fighting back very hard and really pushing quite effectively the Russians from making an entrance into the city center. We were out earlier, again, in that suburb of Irpin. We heard a similar sort of story, although not quite to this extent. A lot of artillery going back and forth, a lot of black smoke. Very few civilians left in that area, although there were still some people struggling to get out after more than 12 days pinned down. But we heard today, Anderson, from the brother of the mayor, Vladimir Klitschko, who basically said that Ukrainian officials now believe that Kyiv could be besieged. It could be encircled any day now. And he went on to say that if that does happen, it would only be about 2 weeks before food supplies started to run out. And as I mentioned last night, we talked about how there had been an uptick in fighting around Brovary, that eastern suburb, really showing that Russian forces are starting to make that arc. I don't know if you can hear that. Again, there's just a lot of explosions in the background there. But as I was saying, Russian forces not just any longer occupying the sort of northwest and western side of Kyiv and the city center, but also squeezing in now from the east. And so the worry becomes, or frankly, the prognosis becomes that the intention is to fully surround the city, to starve the city, to bombard the city, and then ultimately to try to overthrow Zelensky's government. But as you know, as we have seen in videos and on the ground, Ukrainian forces are everywhere in this city now. They have dug up defensive positions along all the main thoroughfares leading into the city. They've put tank traps around. This is a heavily fortified city now, Anderson, and even if Russian forces are able to encircle it, it will still be an almighty battle for them to get to the heart of it, Anderson.
Caitlin, President Biden, well, actually, Caitlin, before I go back to you, Clarissa, let me just ask you, I mean, how you talk about your Russian forces in the northwest and in the east. I mean, how capable are they of actually surrounding Kyiv at this point? Because there are some who had raised questions about whether the Russian military would be even capable of actually surrounding Kyiv.
So I think that the prognosis for people who, military analysts who are watching this closely is that it would be feasible for them to surround the city, although it's been a lot slower going than they had hoped it would be for a number of reasons. A, I don't think they'd anticipated the fight they would get from the Ukrainians. B, they've run into all sorts of resupply issues. We know now from those Maxar images that large convoy has sort of broken apart, which might indicate that some of those supplies got to where they needed to
to be. But now the question becomes, sorry, it's just a continuous round of explosions going on in the background. Can they encircle the city? It looks like they potentially can, particularly if they're moving in from different directions. Can they take the city? That is a very different story, particularly because those Ukrainian defenses here in the capital are so strong. The question becomes, how far are they willing to go? Or I should say, how low are they willing to stoop, in terms of indiscriminate bombing, in terms of trying to starve people out? And that will largely determine how effective or plausible it is for them to take the full capital of Kyiv, Anderson.
I mean, that could be the strategy for Kyiv. Just surround it and just obliterate it. Just continually fire shells into it, drop bombs on it. However they do it, just pound it into submission.
And squeeze. I mean, they could encircle it and just really start to squeeze. Exactly as you're saying with bombardment. But also, Anderson, after 2 weeks, food supplies start running low, medicines start running low. We've got a huge amount of people who've been evacuated into this city center. So even though roughly half the population of Kyiv have left, they've also had a massive influx of people coming in from the suburbs and some of those cities in the north that have been the hardest hit. So it could become extremely difficult, challenging, and also even more dangerous for the civilians of this city in the days and weeks to come.
Caitlin, President Biden spoke with President Zelensky today. What have you learned about that call?
Well, yeah, and can I just speak to something about what Clarissa is saying there, and the concern here at the White House when it comes to this plan that they believe Russia does have to encircle Kyiv is getting stuff into Kyiv once that happens, because that has already become much more challenging now than it was a month ago for the United States and other NATO allies to actually get the equipment that they are sending into Ukraine to Ukraine. Before, they were flying it directly into the capital. You were seeing these pictures posted on Twitter feeds from the Pentagon, from Ukrainian officials, of these huge shipments that were going in. Now they're having to find very different ways to get it in, and a concern that they do have is that once they do encircle the city, they are going to have a really tough time getting that in there. Not just getting humanitarian assistance in there, but getting the defensive assistance that the Ukrainians need to try to push back on the Russians, and that has helped them slow their advance into Ukraine so far. And that's been a big concern at the White House. And I think they realize that time is closing here, because we've talked about this assistance package that Capitol Hill is working on to get to Ukraine. But of course, they've actually got to get it there once it does get passed by lawmakers on Capitol Hill. And today, when President Biden was speaking, after he did have this 49-minute conversation with President Zelensky, which is a little bit longer than the typical conversations that the two of them have had since the invasion started, President Biden said they are going to make sure Ukraine has what it needs to fight back against Russia. Now, he made clear that is not going to involve U.S. forces on the ground, in the skies, over Ukraine. But he did say when it comes to equipment, they want to make sure that they have what they believe is the most effective. Now, there's been disagreement over whether or not that involves those used jets that, of course, Poland wanted to get to them to then have the U.S. transfer. But I do think that is going to be the next challenge that the White House is watching very closely.
Yeah, Caitlin Collins, thank you. Clarissa Ward, thank you. Be careful with new shelling heard just now in Kyiv. Our military experts join us next to help make sense of that and today's many other developments, their take as well, and what the day and the week add up to in the larger sweep of the war. And later, we'll talk to Clarissa and see her report on the staggering human crisis in Irpin and the people going to extraordinary lengths to help.